is Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy. Senator Kennedy, welcome back to the show, sir.
Thanks, Chuck.
And I said we think because I think we don't know if this hearing, I know it's scheduled, but do you have an update of what you know about whether Dr. Ford is going to participate in this hearing yet?
As of 12:15, when a number of the Republican members of the committee met with our staff, they had tried repeatedly to reach Professor Ford's attorney, I think Ms. Katz, and hadn't been able to get through, hadn't heard back from her. We met, I mean the Republican members of the committee met yesterday, decided we wanted to have a hearing, a public hearing.
Right.
We offered Thursday or Monday to our Democratic colleagues. I don't know who made the decision, but it was decided to do it on Monday. Today we got an update, and the only change that I know of is that we agreed to tell Professor Ford that if she would rather do it in a private hearing, she can do it in a private hearing. It's her choice, public or private.
Any reason why they scheduled the hearing before finding out if she was available?
Well, you've got to start somewhere, and the normal way that the Senate committees work, at least it's been my experience, is they set a date, and They say, okay, here's the date, and we expect everybody to be here. That's why, in part, not totally the reason, but in part why we gave Professor Ford 2 different dates.
Is there a deadline in your mind for her to agree, or do you feel as if this should be scheduled until you gavel the hearing, and if she's not there, then the hearing doesn't happen? Or when do you reassess whether this hearing should take place?
Well, I want to see what happens Monday. I hope Professor Ford comes. Judge Kavanaugh will be there. He's told me that personally. I mean, the process, as you know, is pretty much over. The confirmation hearing is over. The confidential session that the senators have with the nominee is over. The FBI background investigation is over. The time period to submit written questions is over. Professor Ford has made these allegations. They should be taken seriously. I hope she elects to come Monday, and frankly, I hope she elects to do it in a public hearing. I think it's important for the American people to hear both Judge Kavanaugh and Professor Ford, but I don't know whether she's going to come or not.
You know, it's been interesting about this, whether this should be public or private. Judge Kavanaugh did practice sessions. He's basically done this before, in some ways, very prepared for a public setting. You know, in the workplace, when somebody makes an accusation like Dr. Ford did, you wouldn't put her in front of the board of directors of a company and say, okay, you're on firing line here. That's a tough thing to ask somebody to do, to go public like this. You really think it should be public and not private?
I would prefer that it be public, because I think that it's important for the American people to see both people and judge for themselves. But if Professor Ford says, look, I'm not comfortable in a public setting, I want to do it privately, I'll agree to that. My preference, though, is to do it publicly so that the American people can judge for themselves.
What questions do you have for the professor?
I don't have any questions yet. I want to hear her side of the story. I mean, you've got to start somewhere. Most of the news that I'm a United States Senator, I was elected by my people to advise and consent, and all the information I have so far is coming out of the New Yorker and the Washington Post, and they're both fine periodicals, but I'd kind of like to hear it from Dr. Ford, hear her story, and then I want to hear the response of Judge Kavanaugh. Every senator, I understand, if the proceeding is held as it normally is entitled to ask questions. I don't have a list of questions prepared like I had for Judge Kavanaugh. I'm not interested in a cross-examination or a cultural or political combat. I'm interested in letting Dr. Ford have her say. I want to hear what she has to say.
I'm sure this is not easy to articulate, so I'm giving you an out already. But how do you judge when you decide someone is telling the truth or not? And obviously you have to make an assessment. You're going to listen to her story. You've read the Washington Post. Obviously you want to hear it straight from her, not just through the Washington Post. What goes through your head of when you decide someone's telling the truth?
Well, I've never been on a jury. I've always wanted to serve on a jury, but I'm an attorney, and a lot of times the other attorneys will strike an attorney from a jury pool. I just want to hear how sincere. I just want to hear what the facts are. How much she remembers. Is she sincere? I don't know. It's hard to describe. It's sort of like people watching this interview. You know, some people are going to say, well, Kennedy's full of bull, or some people will say, well, he made a good point or a bad point. I don't think there's any rational process. It's just sort of a human
Let me ask you this. The allegation obviously is troubling enough to you that you think you need to hear more from her. If her story's credible to you, does that have an impact on your vote?
Well, of course it does. But we're not there yet. I mean, I don't have enough. I've been asked all day, and I understand why, to speculate. Well, what if this happens, and what if she says this, and what if he says that? And I honestly don't know. I just know what I've read in the media. I'm not saying I don't trust the media, but I've got to cast a vote here, and what appears to be a fine person has made I don't know her, but she's a professor at an important university, has made a very serious allegation against a nominee that I was very impressed with. And I want to hear from both of them and give them both the opportunity. I'd rather do it in public because I think the American people need to hear it. But if Professor Ford wants to do it privately, and I can understand why she might, I'll do it privately. I'll do it whenever, within reason, whenever she wants to do it. But everybody has to understand this is not the start of this process. It's at the very end. And are there going to be other witnesses?
I saw that there was some thought of other witnesses, perhaps Mr. Judge, who she said was an eyewitness. I know he put out a letter, but do you want other witnesses at this hearing?
You know, I want to hear from I'm told we're not supposed to use these terms, but the accused and the accuser. I think I'm being fair to both of them. I want to start with them, but I don't have enough information to decide whether we need to have other witnesses. I just know secondhand what the allegations are. I need to hear the allegations from the person making them.
Have you asked Brett Kavanaugh directly, since he's reached out to you, whether any of this is true?
Yes, I have.
And what was his answer to you?
Very firm, no, absolutely not. He's committed. I mean, he wants to come testify. I think he would do it this afternoon if we could get his schedule. He didn't hedge, not a bit, Chuck.
Okay, all right. Well, Senator Kennedy, I'm gonna leave it there. It's gonna be a long week, I'm guessing, before we get to Monday. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing your views. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.